Hello, everyone. I'm Mulaney Barnett, the founder of the Black Artists and Designers Guild. We're happy you're curious about Obsidian, our virtual concept house for the modern, multi-generational Black family of 2025 that will debut in January 2021. It's the first incubator project from the BADG Guild, which is devoted to increasing equity in the interior design industry. Our project will showcase the work of 22 BADG Guild members, a distinguished international group of Black creators, including fine artists, architects, and interior designers. Each of the spaces designed with Black cultural history and practices in mind, plus the need for wellness, safety, and security. Be sure to sign up for the BADG Guild on the BADG Guild website to be one of the first to take the interactive tour of the house. Thanks for joining the first Obsidian Creators in Conversation, a series of discussions of Black cultural issues addressed for the Obsidian House. Today, we're so fortunate that our moderator, Asad Syrkett, the editor-in-chief of Elle Decor, an Obsidian media partner through the Hearst Luxury and Design Collection. I'm handing it over to Asad, who's gonna lead a discussion around Obsidian, Oakland, and the Black Panther's social legacy. Thank you all for joining.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Mulaney, and thank you to everybody who's dialed in today to join us and have this conversation. So excited to be here and help lead the discussion. I'm joined, of course, by two of the architects for Obsidian, Nina Cooke John of Studio Cooke John, and Leyden Lewis of Leyden Lewis Design Studio, both based here in New York City, as I am as well.
Hello.
Hello, hello.
Hello, hello.
Well, so excited to get this conversation going. I'm excited just to have a forum for this, especially in this week, obviously.
Yes,
Absolutely.
yes.
Great, so I thought we could start by talking about these backdrops we all have. I think folks have probably realized that we're on green screens. I don't actually have this lovely image in my apartment here in Brooklyn behind me. Either one of you can start, but maybe Leyden, actually, if you can just describe what this backdrop is and its significance.
Well, hi, I'm Leyden Lewis, and I am one of the co-architects and designers of the Obsidian project. And Obsidian is the name of our incubator, as I'm sure, as it was introduced. And the name is of igneous rock. It's a lava. And it's basically a glass composite mineral. And, historically, in certain spiritual practices, it's meant, it's a protective stone. It shields against negativity. Again, from certain Eastern practices, it's, it establishes the base of the chakra. So, we wanted to select something that was at the core principles as an icon of our house. To establish, the point of view and the reasoning for the house, which is about wellness and healing. At its core, Black. We'll expand on that in the future conversation. And so what you're basically looking at is a kind of a thread work kind of detail of an embroidery, if you will, of the obsidian rock behind us.
Great, and can you speak really briefly about the connection between Obsidian and Oakland and maybe the region of the Bay Area?
Nina?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of Obsidian, the project of which the virtual house is a part, we really thought of this project as being rooted in the ideas of not only technology, but innovation. And when we think about technology and innovation, the Bay Area is definitely critical to innovation, ongoing. And it's kind of the heart of Black tech as well. We wanted to also highlight the idea that, Black people are integral to, though they're not many, but integral to innovation in terms of how that plays out in the Bay Area. And then beyond the tenets of technology and innovation, we also wanted to look to an area that was both urban, but had more space, and we could talk about indoor and outdoor living. And then of course there is the historical precedence of the Black Panther Party being in Oakland and having had really core values of family and community in thinking about how to kind of advance the kind of holistic wellness of the Black family.
Yes. You know, one of the things that I found interesting is just hearing that obsidian, the stone, igneous rock, is actually found in the Oakland area. So there's that connection, you know,
Right.
that kind of geological connection across time. And also, you know, you brought up, Nina, the Black Panther Party and its influence in kind of shaping discourse around Black family, Black wellness, the health of Black communities. And we're actually joined today by poet and educator and activist and former leader of the Black Panther Party, Ericka Huggins, who's on the call as well, who'll be joining us to talk about the Black Panther Party's kind of platform and what they actually work toward in terms of housing. Hi, Ericka.
Hello, how are you?
Good, thanks. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, it's an honor.
So this is for everybody to address, but maybe Leyden, you could start. Why did you all feel Oakland was the right place to situate a virtual concept house?
As Nina mentioned earlier, we did want to this nexus of this historical civil rights and activists place for that, you know, made by and for Black people with Black tech. And one of the things that we will be in exploring when the house is revealed is the landscape. I think Nina mentioned, I mean, we as Northeast, you know, as East Coasters, we have seasons. And so this idea of wellness was connected to vegetation, and that the fact that on the West Coast, possibly in the Bay Area, you could actually have vegetation 365 days a year. So that's playing a major role in our landscape. And, you know, food, which is at the core of Blackness, right, and our health, plays a major role in, like, how do we negotiate with the landscape? And so much of us are, you know, so many of us here in the East Coast, we you know, real estate and is so tight that, you know, as designers, you know, Nina and I definitely wanted to spread our, you know, our architectural wings.
Yeah, I think it's great too that Nina brought up that, you know, Oakland and the Bay Area, and Oakland especially, have been such a kind of heart of Black cultural production and tech and creativity, you know, musicians, fine artists, literary figures, intellectuals in our communities as, you know, Black Americans and Black kind of diasporic peoples have really had a home in Oakland. And that has made Oakland such fertile territory for creative expression in every medium. You know, I would love to talk a bit more about, Ericka, your feelings about kind of hearing that Obsidian was being created and kind of placed in Oakland as a virtual location.
I was just delighted.
Tell us more.
Really, because Oakland is my home. And also when I saw the beautiful image of Obsidian, I thought, what an opportunity for the hills to shift its symbolic status as for others and become a place for families, Black families, to live. And so it just made me happy. And I shared with other people in my home how happy it made me feel, because I live in a city where if I look to the right or the left or in front of me or behind me, there are houseless villages.
Wow.
And many, many, many Black people in them.
Yeah, and I think for folks who don't know, you know, there was a 10-point program that the Black Panther Party, that was their platform. And the fourth tenet in that 10-point program was housing as a human right, housing as a necessity. I wonder if you could speak briefly about that and the importance of that in the program.
Housing has always been a necessity for people of color in general. And I want to say, looking at the history of African American people, we have always had either someone else's housing to live in,
Mhm.
or if it was our own, we had to struggle to keep the land and to keep the home. And I'm thinking back to the time when people lived in housing projects. So, and they still do. So we've had inferior housing, and because many of us in a multi-generational way have lived in conditions of poverty, we've been blamed for the conditions that we live in. So I think that one of the reasons why housing was a strong point in the 10-point program and platform, which was originally written in 1966 and could have been written before that, is because we do want housing that's fit for the shelter of human beings. And Obsidian, again, makes me smile.
Yes,
Well,
which is always great.
That was pretty heartfelt, Ericka. I got to tell you, you warmed my heart up. This is our first time meeting in connection with this, but I got to tell you, I think that just hearing you say that, I think Nina and I have really, and the group at large has really understood that call to action. I think it's honestly in our DNA that kind of nervousness about either engaging to purchase, that ability to hold on to land, that so much of my own personal family's acquiring of property, that has been major stepstones for us as people of the African diaspora in this country. So.
Yes.
And I wanted to respond to this idea that, for many in the Oakland community, the idea of the Oakland Hills is like the place for the other, right? And that we are deciding to design ourselves into that place. Yes, right. In terms of, as we think of this also as a futuristic project, the Obsidian project is also about imagining ourselves in the future, but designing ourselves in the places where we can lay claim to. It's not only for the other, it's also for us. We can build ourselves into those places and they can belong to us, and they do belong to us.
Exactly. Yeah. We've spoken about homelessness and house ownership, and Leyden, you brought up your own family's story. I'm curious, Nina, to hear from you about some of the other factors that kind of went into consideration when you planned or worked to plan this project.
Yeah, absolutely. We've definitely thought about, whenever there's any kind of economic recession, Black people get hit disproportionately, right? And there have been several kind of demerits towards us having kind of closing that gap in terms of home ownership, whether it is after 2008, housing bubble burst, like Black people disproportionately, their homes were foreclosed upon. So the gains that they might have made in terms of owning houses were then taken away from them because, frankly, of predatory lending practices, right, that targeted Black people specifically. And so, how can we begin to address that gap, which is actually worse now than it was in 1960, where our rates of home ownership compared to those of white families is actually much less than it was in the 60s. So really, again, thinking about this as a futuristic project, which is very hopeful in terms of how we can get to that positive future, and claiming that space and claiming places for our families to find the space to get towards that home ownership, which is the foundation for generational wealth building for all families in the United States.
Yes. Yeah, one of the things I think has galvanized people in this last, 4 months, let's say, since the protests against racial injustice kicked off, you could say, at the beginning of summer, is a real re-examining of some of the structural forces at play that make, this time for conversations about home ownership and access and safety and security feel really kind of overdue, really stark, considering that we've been having these conversations for a long time. And I'd be curious just to hear about some of the other things that have kind of prevented progress in that direction. I mean, we have been having this conversation for a long time. What are some of the things that have been kind of consistent roadblocks for us?
I mean, there have been real estate practices, direct and indirect. I mean, we've been talking a lot more about redlining and exactly what that might have meant in terms of the places that we could buy and we could not buy. And again, thinking about how home ownership has been a pathway to generational wealth for all families in this country. So if you can't create those foundations in places in which the home that you were able to buy could be insured and then could raise in value generation to generation, then you don't get that generation. You don't get that foundation. When we talk about wealth, we're not talking about bling, but more about just a solid foundation for your family to kind of grow. Or real estate practices like just not showing houses to families in this day and age that could be in certain neighborhoods, right? I mean, there have been news features very recently that have exposed many of those, and they continue. And again, as recently as 2008 and beyond, just lending at crazy rates in terms of mortgage lending because Black families were seen as higher risk. So many, many roadblocks to home ownership amongst Black families.
Yeah, and a lot of those roadblocks were the exact types of things that organizers and activists, like the folks who were, founding and leading the Black Panther Party, were working to address. And I'm curious, Ericka, if you could speak just a little bit about the party's efforts to address structural racism as they saw it kind of influence all elements of Black life in a place like Oakland.
Well, in the early 60s, we talked about power structures. And now we use the term structural racism. And we also have to look at structural sexism. Because if we think about who's housed in incarceral sites,
right,
that is both race and gender. And the fastest growing population of incarcerated people is Black women and brown women. And so we always talked about the structures to diminish this idea that there's this one bad guy somewhere who kind of snuck in and did harm. No, we're living in it right now. There is no way we would have experienced in the last 4 years if the setup wasn't happening over time. And so this idea that, as you said, Asad, there was an uptick in understanding, that is because people are moving away from white silence. Structural racism can only stay in place when the people with power and authority and whiteness confers that on some level, say nothing, and do not use their power, their authority, their privileges to make changes. And the federal government, as Nina said, has never prioritized people of color, especially Black people, because we are considered, when I was a little girl in Washington, D.C., the ones who bring the neighborhood down.
yeah.
So I believed when I was growing up, and everywhere I've been ever since then, it is Black people who lift the neighborhood up with a certain level of understanding and culture. And so structural racism is something we all need to be working to. I am looking for the right word, to end. And it is everywhere. It's in every institution of society. Think about education. Think about how tax base, in other words, where you live, can say something about the quality, supposedly, of your children's education. And it also says something about how lonely those educational institutions are in outside of communities of color. If people live and work and build their homes in places where there are very few people of color. So there's always this either or that we have to do. And I think that Obsidian is saying something and doing something that is so radical. It's revolutionary. And I mean that in the most beautiful sense of those words. Change, transformation rather than just change. So the federal government has never held human need as its priority. There has to be some profit related, some benefit related. So there is multi-generational profit for Black people in this idea of housing that not only is beautiful, but it is in nature, and it breathes, and it protects. So I hope that I've answered your question, Asad.
Yes, you have. Yes, you have. Thank you. I mean, we've been talking about existing structures. I love the word structure as a segue in and of itself, almost, to talking about Obsidian, to talking about the project, and talking about how you worked to envision what this structure would look like, this space for safety, security, and wellness. And I'm curious to look at it and to show it to everybody who's joined us today, but then also to talk about why you made the specific design decisions that were made. So Nina, I'll let you begin.
Yeah, and so as Leyden and I would meet on our sessions to kind of think through this idea of this house and really thinking of it as being this futuristic project in which when Black people are dreaming, what is it that we dream about, right? How do we design ourselves into the future? But then there are the realities of the present, the kind of pandemic era that this project came out of, that were really critical in terms of how we thought through this. So, one of the first elements that actually was, kicked off the design was this buffer zone, which is the first thing that you see as you approach the house, and this idea that there's a separation between the inside and the outside, and thinking about the outside during the time of COVID in terms of when you cross that threshold, what needs to happen. So in the buffer zone, which is kind of the most geometrically expressive portion of the house, is also where the kind of traditional spaces of the mudroom could be. So if this family, any members worked within the medical industry, they could come in, disrobe, take a shower, and put their clothes in the wash before entering the house, right? So they could really decontaminate. And the same would happen if you had any guests. There would be in the entryway areas to wash your hands before you came into the house. And so it was kind of a physical buffer, but also mental buffer for the family in terms of safety, security, and kind of entering into a really safe space once you crossed over the buffer. But also housed within the buffer zone on level 1.5 was one of the study spaces. The idea is that, if you're working in this space, and, Amazon deliveries has been huge during this time of kind of seclusion. So if anyone entered, if a delivery came, you would see it's kind of our eye out onto the world beyond the home within that buffer zone. And then at the topmost level of the buffer zone, we had one of the guest suites, which was seen as something that was semi-autonomous, a space that either, a grandparent who lives with you full time, as we were thinking about multi-generational living, or a guest, or even a college age child who, is home either long-term and is living with the family as they establish their own roots, would be within that zone in the buffer. And so that idea of the separation of the outside from the inside, the heart of the family, the immediate family and the extended family that's welcomed into the house.
Let's go inside. I would love to take everybody in there and start to talk about some of the interior spaces.
Yeah, this is, sorry, did you have a specific question, Asad?
No, I mean, we have talked a lot about kind of safety and security and what that means. And I think about vulnerability in that context and why we create buffer zones between, our homes and the world. And I'd be just curious to hear you talk about some of that thinking as it was expressed in the design for the interiors of the house.
I'm going to reference something that's not necessarily African or of the diaspora, but in Japanese architecture, there's a principle of ma, which is like this crossing over. And I think it's true for all non-Western architectural precedents, where whether you're at the mosque and you wash your hands before you go into the building, or you wash your feet as well. So this idea, in many ways, we thought about this as the buffer zone. We're thinking about it in the age of COVID, but actually it's ancient practices to cleanse before entry, right? And then when we finally do pass that membrane, that threshold, we're into a space that has actually exploded. And not only transparency towards the landscape, which is a Western view of the San Francisco Bay and the Bay Area, but also just like formerly spaces that were very, very, let's call them opaque, have now exploded into more transparent, overlapping. It's hard to say where one space begins and the other one ends, and especially its connection to the landscape and what we're calling the pool, guest house, and studio, which you see on the left-hand side of the screen, where again, this did come from a moment where we were really, when this was conceived, we were really in the process of what we understood as we needed to protect ourselves from ourselves and from our own family. So, but we also imagine, like, what if we did want to bring grandma or someone who was immunosuppressed and have them live with us? What about that space that Nina described as getting up to the guest space, which is semi-autonomous, but relies on the heart of the infrastructure of the house, which is basically the kitchen. That's accessible by an elevator. So you could literally come into this space and actually go straight up to that house, that portion of the house, without really interacting for a quarantined period of time. And in contrast to that, we have that studio where it's completely an autonomous guest house, completely independent, so that one could through glass and transparency have visual access across the pool, landscape, and terrace, but really keep each other safe. And yet all of these ideas around protection and visual connection go to support what we really wanted was a kind of a community of visualization, so that people were always aware of how many, how populated the house were with this multi-generational, population of family, and that's really, and yeah, that's really it.
Yeah, I mean, what has been so great for me to understand and talk with all of you about when we talk about this project is just all of the assumptions we make about how residential architecture functions and what it looks like based on kind of Western notions of family and communion. It is actually really uncommon in a lot of places for kids to leave. Nina, to your point, for college-age kids to not live in the home and help, help their families, have their families help them as they set down roots. And it looks like we're looking here at the pool and terrace that Leyden that you mentioned, which is so great to see here as well.
Everyone is in bliss here between the barbecuing and between the food, the water, and the dancing that's happening. It's a bacchanal on a Saturday Saturday afternoon, right? So that's
yes, we can all use that energy right now.
We can all use that energy, and hopefully we'll be all back there sooner than later. So yeah, I mean, you know, so much about, and I just wanted to make this point about so much about memory and how, I mean, Nina and I struggled in our sessions, like not struggled, but we took on that task, like, you know, it's the activation of the Black body in these spaces of abundance. I'm going to call them abundance because one can call it luxury architecture and all of that stuff, but we want to avoid that because when we dream, I don't think we think about numbers. What we think about is of experience. And when you start to think about mom and dad and brother and sister and cousin and uncle in inhabiting a space, I think you need space. You need space to that, and so we actually created space for that kind of connection with family and friends to exist.
And always thinking about family as this multi-generational extended experience, right? Whether it is, again, which is very common practice amongst African-American communities as well as immigrant communities in this country, is multi-generational living, whether it is for just economic needs, like you need to live with each other, or it is by choice. That idea that many of us are living with grandma for a while, or, you know, some other extended family, whether they're living with us temporarily or after some kind of hardship. Maybe it's after Hurricane Harvey and you take someone in, or someone has moved into town. But, you know, also we can all think of fondly of our kind of family gatherings and the kind of joy we get from being with extended family and the importance that is for us beyond just those special occasions. So this house was definitely designed with all of that in mind, and seeing it very expansively as not just being for one family of, you know, 4 and a dog, but really a kind of mosaic of extended family living.
I love the word mosaic in that context. I think that's exactly it. And, you know, we've been talking about structural racism and roadblocks and hindrances toward the goal of what Leyden called Black abundance. And I think abundance is another word that's great here. You know, I've been thinking about home as a center for de-stressing and really thinking about, you know, we use the word wellness. The word wellness gets overused, but well-being, you know, what it looks like to create a home that actually fosters a sense of connection, community, familially, and with the outside world. And I'm curious how Obsidian is addressing some of those ideas, and obviously, you know, barbecuing and having the kitchen be a center for gathering is some of those things, but I'm just curious to hear a bit more about that.
Well, I just remember, like, you know, while brainstorming, we needed a landscape so that you could take a run on your own property. You know, that would be enough, or go out and do some calisthenics or hop in the pool if it was heated, if it's in Oakland, right? You know, just to get that physical, much of what, you know, everyone had a different experience of COVID based on where they actually lived. Right. So if you could go out into your backyard during COVID, during the day, that was an oasis. I live in an apartment in Williamsburg that has no outdoor space. And at one point it felt, would I say dangerous? It felt suspicious to be in the street at one point. When we were really on lockdown. So we have designed spaces on the sub-level that take in some of those other practices like yoga, exercise room. You know, of course, there's places to relax and de-stress, like a theater, but we also have a nice and big, gorgeous wine cellar. We've incorporated something we refer to as the brewery space, because one of the things that we like to bring as part of our African heritage and our ancestry, wherever we come from, is that there's always some poultice, some mauby, some sorrel, something to bring in to make healing remedies from things that you actually picked in the garden. You know, so or hooch. You know, if you were so inclined to make some beer or apple orchard, some apple wine, whatever, you know. But we wanted that to be a part that would be a core underneath the kitchen, so that we could produce. Like, imagine a house that was fully sustainable, you know, on itself, you know, on its own produce for, let's say, 6 months to a year, with only a little bit of peripheral, you know, additional things to have life work besides the Amazon truck. You know?
Yeah, being able to kind of sustain yourself in this house was important, because like we said, this project really came out of a time when it was developed during COVID, right? So, you know, Leyden and I were talking about, first we were talking about, you know, Black families were disproportionately affected by the disease and died at higher rates. Why is that? Because of certain, you know, negative health realities that we face. How do we address those in this house, right? How do we provide a space to exercise, to meditate? You know, we have a sanctuary space at the edge of the property where you can walk to, where as you walk, it can be a meditative experience, or you can run, like Leyden said. But once you get there, it could be a place, again, whether on your own, to meditate, or communally, it could be a place to worship, or maybe it's a place to grieve. You know, we were thinking about people's families dying and not being able to have a funeral experience. So, you know, we were kind of building all kinds of possibilities into this space. And in terms of health and wellness, we really looked into it in terms of physical fitness, mental wellness, but also practices related to eating and nutrition, in terms of being able to grow as much of your own produce, as well as herbs and spices on the property that you can then use, you know, for your own well-being.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like a lot of this has come out of this conversation that we're having, but I'm curious, Ericka, to hear about how Obsidian reflects some of the Black Panther Party's kind of thinking around housing and self-sufficiency and community, as you see it.
It reflects it entirely. When we talked about housing, we weren't just talking about, you know, a room for someone to
Right.
We were already living like that. I remember visiting the Cabrini Green housing project in Chicago. No human being should have lived there. States often produce housing for people who are living in conditions of poverty that replicate something of carceral architecture. When I taught at Cal State University East Bay, I was told by a professor who looked at how systems work, that when I asked him, why does this building have no windows? It's awful, and the hallways are very tiny. It's very, it's not uplifting. And he said that the buildings at Cal State University East Bay had been borrowed from prison architecture.
Wow.
For the state of California. Now think about Cabrini Green. I'm thinking about the Havens Court projects in Oakland, which are not high rise, but flat. So not beautiful, nothing, no trees, no, unless someone planted something in the tiny space right around their place of living. So we were always thinking of this. Why is it that we get the inferior places poor in materials, as well as energy and lighting and so on? Why? And the answer to why, there are a number of answers, but the point is we wanted housing, again, fit for the shelter of human beings, little human beings, as well as adult ones. Children need space to play. And I was thinking while you were talking, Nina, about I meditate every day. So one of the first things I thought about when I looked at just the image that I was first sent is that there's so many places where I can go outside and sit with trees, or in the sun, or on a cloudy day. It doesn't matter. and that children could revel in being outside in nature that is theirs, that no one can say, you can't go here, you don't belong there. It's a sense of belonging with the land.
Mm.
So ancient to all of us.
Mm.
And so we were very much aware that we couldn't build the housing. The Black Panther Party couldn't build it, but that it could be built. And we were always advocating for people with their landlords or their slumlords about not having to ask and then wait years to have some small thing fixed. There's so much beauty in owning one's own space because the externals cannot take up a lot of cognitive space if you really are at home.
Mm.
And I was thinking about, as Leyden, as you were talking about stepping over the threshold. In India, there is a whole, in parts of India, there's a whole process for this. You pause, you touch your heart, you step forward with one foot, you recognize that you've entered sacred space. And obsidian feels sacred to me, in addition to everything else that it feels. It's joyful, it's beautiful. It's also sacred because I can connect with my own sacred center, which we all have. So the Black Panther Party was thinking like this. We were very visionary. As a matter of fact, many of us had been in school for architecture or art. and I was a poet from age 8. I was imagining that when the barbecuing is over and I'm by myself, I could sneak up to the place where the pool is because it may be one of the higher spaces in the structure. And I could envision, not for some purpose, just allow my heart to open and therefore the poetry to flow. We don't get to do that. The cognitive space is crowded.
Yes.
And I also want to say this, because I love her so. I never met her, but I love her. What if Breonna Taylor had lived in Obsidian? I don't believe what happened to her would have happened. I believe something would have happened for her.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, what I will say, and thank you, Ericka, for all of that. I think, we understand home as a sphere of agency. We understand home as a sphere of sanctuary, as a sphere of inspiration, comfort. And all of those things are really beautifully reflected in this project. So it's exciting to get to talk to all of you about the thinking behind it and the design process. And I am sure that people in the audience have questions. So I'm going to open the floor up to questions. And I'll repeat them so that folks can hear what the question is, and then we can throw them to our panelists. Let's see. Anything brewing question-wise? Okay, so one question: how is Obsidian different from other virtual concept homes and other homes more broadly? I mean, we've talked about some of the differences in the way of our thinking about kind of Black diasporic identity and multi-generational family structures, but maybe talk about the structure itself and kind of the architectural design of the home and ways that it departs from typical Western homes.
Leyden and I have been talking about this for a while in terms of how it is that we're developing it. And I don't know that there's anything that you're going to be able to point to and say, this makes it a Black house or that makes it a Black house necessarily, right? And it's more about the idea that it is designed specifically for Black families and understanding the multiple ways that might manifest. And it will, once you guys actually see the designs of the 25 different creators, you will see and experience the multiple ways that each of these Black creators envisions a space for a Black family, showing the kind of diasporic, really, even if we're just talking about within the United States, ways that Black people are thinking. You know, we are not a monolithic block by any means. All of our experiences are different. All of our means of expression are different, even as designers. And so I think it's just a place for us to, you know, like Ericka was saying in terms of poetry, but for a place for us, we don't often have Black families as clients. So for us to really pull together our kind of creative, you know, ideas and see how they manifest in 25 different ways.
Yeah, and also I just wanted to piggyback on something that Nina's said. When we speak about family as a Black queer man, I had to step in and, you know, and make sure that there was a space where we could imagine that this, you know, sometimes Nina uses this reference I love, like two lesbian couples have occupy, and they are the anchor family because we've given them space to become that person, that family within the greater family, right? Because the house was thought of as an anchor, a home for the anchor family, the person who may come from with means, but you can always go back to that center, right? As a legacy, like this is a generational place where we revisit for mentorship, we revisit for respite. And so we wanted to make sure that everyone understood that there are the word family and how it can sometimes be used politically. That is not the family we're talking about. We are talking about a family that encompasses just about every iteration of relationship, both blood and non-blood, that you can have within Black people and our connections.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. In fact, someone just asked in the Q&A box about how the home supports queer family structures. So that, I think that answers that person's question. And that's great to know that thinking, you know, as a queer Black man myself, it's great to hear that thinking was part of the process for all of you. Someone asked, in an ideal world, how does the Obsidian kind of concept mature beyond this virtual experience?
Well, I think one of the things that think of it as a talisman that you would find, and that talisman speaks and it has script on its surface, and it tells you a story about the people that came before it, and it tells you how some principles. What I think Nina would say differently about what we would want everyone to take away from the experience of the virtual concept house is not that you have to build a 10 or 12,000 foot home in the hills of Oakland, but that you can imagine, I need to exercise and I need to carve out a space in my home to take care of my body because I have just been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. I need to address the fact that my mental, I get too angry. Am I taking care of myself? Is there mental hygiene? What are they talking about this meditation room? I go to church. Do I need to meditate? Can I meditate and go to church? The answer is yes, right? So there's all these questions. There should be a series of questions, and those questions are going to trigger us into Obsidian 2.0. That's how we build on it, with the questions.
And I don't think I disagree. I think I definitely agree. And the idea is that Black people will come here and see themselves here, right? And by seeing yourself here, you go away and you manifest that in your own life one way or another. I remember, you know, from those of you who grew up in the late 80s, when we used to watch The Cosby Show, and people said, Black people don't live like that, but it didn't matter, right? You saw yourselves there. You understood yourself as a part of that family, no matter how different it was, and you could take something away from it and manifest it in your life outside of the TV show.
Yes, exactly. It was about having a mirror be held up for people to begin to see themselves in that mirror. whether or not it was a perfect reflection or not.
Exactly.
Just having the mirror up for people to start to imagine circumstances that were different from maybe the things that they felt were the only possibilities for them.
No, and thinking about good times actually that precedes that. I never thought about the Cosby Show, making a comparison between Cosby Show, Good Times, and that's a whole other project.
Right. So there are a few questions.
Okay.
A few people have said that they want to live there, which no surprises there. I think we all would love to live there. So that's great. Someone asked about specific design elements that make it possible for different generations to exist in harmony. Obviously, there are lots of different priorities for members of the family. What are some of the design moves, design elements that help foster harmonious living across generations?
Respect. I mean, that's an internal job. Nothing in architecture, nothing physically built. We still have gravity and Black people still have gravity. Nothing that we can build can these ideas in these rooms represent principles and practices of internal work, exercise, spirituality, connection, respect, and that's how harmony is built, by listening. So there's a lot of spaces to listen. There's a lot of places for solace, to Ericka's earlier point, where she can go out into the landscape. And so if you're taking care of your interior, your real interior design, then you have harmony.
Mm-hmm. And I think there are also this ideas where there are some spaces where you can have full autonomy, right? So you have the time to be away and be by yourself and do whatever you need to do, and spaces that are collective. And there are flexible spaces. We have certain spaces that are in between. We talk about, for some of us, like at Christmas, sometimes I have 20 people at our house. Some have come up from Jamaica, some from other places, and we love it. For a week, it's full, people sleeping on the floor everywhere. So thinking about, those kinds of spaces that can be flexible, so that when the people have gone, what are you using those spaces for? And, the guest rooms are designed in different ways. So flexibility, different levels of autonomy, but also understanding the collective spaces in which we are going to be sharing our lives within the house.
I've so appreciated that in this conversation, we're centering Black experiences and Black family arrangements and all of it in terms of how we discuss the house and the design of the house. We do have a question from someone who wants to know how white designers can be more considerate and inclusive as they go about working in the architecture and design space. And I'd be curious to hear anybody on the panel kind of sound off on that.
I think the key is listening, right? And I think even within ourselves, as Leyden and I were designing, like I had to listen to his experience as a Black queer man and what that might mean for manifestation in the house. And he would listen to me as, a relatively heteronormative family with 3 kids and a dog, right? And understanding the different perspectives and how they're different. Like we're going to occupy the space differently. And so if you are designing for someone else, you can't assume that what's working for you is going to work for them. You need to leave all of that at the door, right? Your job is really you're not creating a space for yourself, you're creating a space for someone else. And you need to get really intimate with understanding everything that comes with them, their immediate cultural background, as well as their larger cultural background, so that it really is for them. And it's really just a matter of being listening and being empathetic, ultimately.
And might I say, I'm not one of the designers, although I wish I was. I'm reminded of how the Black Panther Party's community survival programs, each one of the 65 of them, came into being. I know you don't know about them, but that's because they were intentionally left out of history. But I'm recalling them now because what we did was we asked people, what do you want? And when we were when parents, Nina, said, we want, an education for our children that shows them how beautiful and brilliant and valuable they are. That was the beginning of this the staff that would become part of that school, Oakland Community School in East Oakland, thinking of, well, if you see beautiful, you'll feel beautiful. So we made the school space. It was an old church. And we did the best we could with that. But also we asked the children, walk through. What would you like? How would you like it to look? How would you like it to feel? And they were the ones who told us that they needed 3 meals a day, not just 2, because their parents were working 3 jobs, single moms working 3 jobs. They didn't have any blame. They were just telling the truth. So what I see as I'm listening, Leyden, to you and Nina is, and to my own heart, is that walking people through this who live in community, in housing that isn't as beautiful and as well thought, listening and recognizing that all human beings want to be seen. They want to be heard and valued. So, you know, I was thinking, for a white designer, architect, talk to people about what they want without holding your fixed idea about how it ought to be. I know what the academy can do when we're in school. It can tell us this is wrong and that is right. Here's the good answer. Here's a poor answer. So we have to let go. We have to step back and let go and listen, like Nina said, but also watch carefully. I watch children when they're in a space. Where do they want to go? What do they want to do in that space? Why? And sometimes I ask questions. This is such a beautiful conversation. It's so uplifting for me. Thank you.
I'm so glad that we could do this today. And thank you to all 3 of you, and to Mulaney, and Maria Hunt, who's been helping coordinate today, and to everybody who's put this together. Thank you for having me and letting me lead this conversation today. It really is, in an intense week, in an intense year, in an intense era, it's great to end on a note of listening and empathy. So thank you for that note, Ericka. And thank you to everybody who joined today. We really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll be in touch soon.
Thank you.
Thank you, Asad.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much, Ericka. Thank you.
Leyden. Thank you, Malini.
Thank you, everybody.